What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence here with another episode of Watch God Work. In every episode, we get the unique and distinct pleasure to talk to brothers and sisters who are just doing amazing work in every field of human endeavor, and they get to share their God stories, the ways in which God has been at work in their lives, but specifically in their work. And today is no different. I have my brother Justin Giboney. What's going on, King?
All right, nothing to it, man. Thanks for having me, Lawrence.
Brother, man, I'm excited, man, and it's always a story when I'm just like, man, meeting my brothers from Colorado and just wanting to know, like, bro, how was that coming up? But brother, man, you've come to be known, obviously, as someone who loves God, but you've put your hand to the plow around this just tension. I think for brothers and sisters, men and women, about how do I kind of bring my full self, my convictions, my beliefs, my heart to the public square in ways that are effective, in ways that are honoring. But you've done much more in a very short amount of time, and I'm so grateful to have you here. So, let's kick it off, man. Who is Justin Giboney?
Who is he? Well, I am a Christian. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 3 sons.
Woo!
Yeah. I'm an attorney, political strategist, and really just someone whose ministry focuses on the intersection between faith and politics. I mean, that's really my passion. I feel like God has through the steps of my life, God has kind of put me in this position that I'm in today, and just thankful, man, and always looking to build community, always looking to reach out to other believers with the understanding that we need each other and we need to build the kingdom.
I think many decades ago, the notion of there being a brother or sister who loves God and who is fully invested, has given their full life to to politics, to the public square and civic engagement in ways, I think it makes sense. I mean, when we look at just some of our leaders, there was never this wall, right? It felt like the church was at work in that. I'm curious for you, just in your genesis, because you've done a number of things. You're a baller, great football player. And you did a number of things coming up, but how early did you get a sense that, you know what, this is the path I need to be on, this is the way God will use me? Just what's the genesis story for you about just your interest in this legal work and taking it even beyond that?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know that it was all that early. I think it was probably until after law school. I mean, I always had some interest in politics. I always kind of talked about it quite a bit. I loved political biographies, but it probably wasn't until after I was at a law school that I said, you know what, I need to be in politics. I need to do some political. And it really came through conversations with our mutual friend, Justin Tanner. We were both in Atlanta. We both, went to law school together, came to Atlanta to work. And we had this group that would come together and we would just talk about either sports or we talk about politics. And as a mayoral election was coming up, we kind of looked around and said, man, we need to get in the game. Like, why are we being so academic about these conversations? We're able-bodied, we're able to jump into the game. And so we decided to put our hat in. We did some research on the candidates, found one who was a state senator at the time, Kasim Reed, that we thought was the best candidate. And that's really how it all started. And I'll be honest, when I first got into politics, I don't even think I got into it for the right reasons. I think I was still kind of going through withdrawal from what was probably an idol of my life of sports and the competition that came with sports. And I think initially I saw that competition in politics as a way to kind of get that fixed. And that's initially a part of the reason why I jumped in. It wasn't just to help the community. I'd probably like to say that, but that wouldn't be the whole truth.
Bro, that's refreshingly real. It's refreshingly real, and one would think that someone would be saying that. Now, I'm not as familiar with Atlanta politics. I think for anybody who's done any reading of Obama or, here in New Jersey with, Baraka and Newark and everything, they think like Chicago and Jersey. That's where people are really going at it in maybe not the most ethical ways. But to your point, that was a draw, and which is interesting. It's interesting to hear, that. Was there even with that draw of kind of just that the competitive element of it, was there even early at that time any view of can I bring my full self? Were those questions starting to be there early on? Because you did a number of things, right? From the being a delegate with the Democratic Party, working with Obama and the like. Just did you how early did that come in, or that didn't come in that early? Where you're just like, do I have to give something up to just to get in the game?
Yeah, it didn't come in early enough. But I
Mm,
think what really got to me was after we won that election, that initial election, and I saw one of the other candidates at an event, and I said to her, I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And she said something to me like, I'm a lot better now that y'all aren't on my back."
mm,
And I think that was kind of a catalyst for me to say, well, we did really have an impact on her life. And that's not to say the campaign was all bad or whatever. It was just a regular campaign. It wasn't unethical or anything like that. But with any campaign, there are things that are said that might not, that didn't have to be said. And I was part of that. And hearing her reaction, I think that's the first time that I said, something's got to change. And so it was probably a process after that. And then the other thing is I just started to realize that a lot of brothers and sisters who were Christians in this city of Atlanta, where there are a lot of Christians, still didn't feel like they could bring their Christian convictions into the political space. And I just was completely uncomfortable with that. And so that's when I really started to be like, all right, Christians got to speak up. We got to do something differently. And that, I think, started the journey to more faithful political engagement.
mm. This this is it's really real. There's the impact you have. I think that's is for many people sometimes have been the turnoff over the years, right? That it feels that it's no holds barred, that there isn't
Mm.
really a line, and that if you have to get involved just to survive, you have to kind of play by the rules to quote unquote win. And it's interesting that was a kind of a point of reflection for you. So I want to hold this piece because I want to get into the AND campaign even more deeply. But then this other piece of just your relationship with God, and just in parallel, what was the genesis of that coming up? When
Mm.
did that start to kind of really get to a place where you just said, all right, beyond just like I said, for many people it's cultural. That's many of the stories for brothers and sisters I know professionally where it was cultural. They came up in the church. Just what was the story with you and God, and then when did it become like, oh, this actively needs to be part of the work?
Yeah. So I mean, I was raised in the church. I'm the son of a PK.
Mm,
My grandfather was a bishop in the Church of Living God, PGT Nation,
mm,
and so that was always part. That kind of that Black church experience was always part of what I was doing.
mm,
Also, you talk to Datavio Samuels. I mean, that's my day one brother, man. We went to church together probably since we were like 7 or 6 or 7 years old. So knew that brother, loved that brother, and was just always always in the church. It was something that was just an assumption of where I was supposed to be. I think as I got into high school, as I got into college, kind of went along with some of the stereotypes of what an athlete is supposed to be. Went to Vanderbilt, got a very funny gospel that kind of allowed me to do whatever I
funny gospel.
and as long as I did some community service, I was all right. So for me, it was convenient. I was like, hey, I can be a Christian and I don't really have to be obedient.
Mm,
Cool. But I knew it was kind of wrong. And I think as time went on, God brought me low. I found myself in some situations that I had no business being in, either hurting people or hurting myself. And eventually I had to reckon with it, and God made me reckon with it.
mm,
So as I'm reckoning with that, I'm in politics and my faith is getting a little stronger, preparing to, get married and things of that nature. And I think I just started to take my faith a lot more seriously.
mm,
And when I was taking my faith more seriously, at the same time, I was looking at politics like the Christian witness in politics is kind of weak, and,
mm.
and it shouldn't be that weak. And there shouldn't be this assumption that even though I come from a place where there are a lot of Christians and all this, that I have to set aside my some of my more culturally conservative values, and that just shouldn't be the case. And I think God was just working all that stuff around the same time.
Mm. I'm curious, brother. I want to take this even deeper, man. I'm curious about the faith that it requires to go into public service. Here's what I mean. A lot of brothers and sisters I know, most of the brothers around me are lawyers, attorneys, and kind of coming out of law school, it was just like, yeah, we put on these capes, but brothers got loans, fam. Like it was just like, yeah, we about to go to Sidley, but we about to go to Skadden, and we we gonna get that firm check, right? What did faith play any role in that? Because there's been a conversation around just a generation of people that we lose because of the student debt crisis, because of the reality of I have so much leverage, I can't really afford to be in the public square and do this maybe 20 years from now. How much did your faith play out, or were you just kind of fortunate where you're like, yeah, I was able to keep a cap on it to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly made a way, and I think faith played a huge role in it. People say, man, it's so courageous of you to go out and do this, and to talk about the things that you're talking about. And I really say, I kind of push back on that to say, I don't feel like God really gave me a choice. Like that's how it's felt. I never felt like it was like a real choice, and that's not like a theological commentary on free will or anything like that. But I just always felt like once he called me to do it, it wasn't as much of a choice as he was leading me directly into where I needed to be. And then I think he made a way. There were some sacrifices along the way, but he allowed me to be in a position where for a good amount of time when I was getting the AND campaign off the ground, I was doing that while I was still practicing law full time. So I was kind of doing both at the same time. Gave me kind of a runway to get going, but also allowed me to have proof of concept so that when I went to donors who were passionate about faith and politics, I could already show them, look what the AND campaign has done I haven't asked anybody for anything, and look what we've already accomplished. And so I think that helped the transition to be a little more smooth. But generally, it was something that I felt called to and didn't really feel like I had an option, and just was just kind of pulled in.
This is really great. Because I want to even press the gas a bit around forum, because one of the things I appreciate about the AND campaign, even inherent in the name, is kind of a nuance. It's kind of like both and. I always believe that the gospel is paradox, right? That the cross is as much the beauty and the love of God as much as it's the human ugliness and sin at the same time, right? And so I feel that's captured in the essence of it. But we live in this time where the conversations are happening are much different, right? I think some may argue that things were a little bit more in person, maybe, right? We have such a whole digital revolution where so many conversations about the public, about what's happening in the world, are happening online. They're happening within characters. They're happening in these spaces where it doesn't necessarily lend itself for nuance. And so how, even as you're kind of building up and campaign, and the reality, to what degree does your faith kind of push against the forum and where the conversation is happening to say, you know what, these type of conversations that were happening, we can't have these things online, even though that's where the conversations are happening. Just what does that look like within you, your prayer, and the team around just the reality of conversations today among young Gen Z, Gen X, just like what does that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely a tension. Because and this is how I usually explain it. As an attorney, Lawrence, I know how to ask you a question where there are actually two wrong answers, right? And so often that's exactly what happens in the public square to Christians. We get asked a question, oh, well, do you affirm this person and everything they do completely, or do you hate them? Well, that's a false dilemma, right? Like, I can disagree with somebody and I can love them. So what I try to tell Christians is that we have to reframe the question. And you see Jesus doing that a lot of times. They ask him a question trying to trick him, and he reframes the question around a different framework, that gospel framework that we often see. And that's what Christians have to do when it comes to some of these very tough issues that a lot of Christians are struggling with, because we don't want to seem hateful. We don't want to seem like we lack compassion, but it's really what we're really struggling with is answering a question that's framed wrong. And so step into politics today, this is what we're told. There's this false dichotomy that the AND campaign talks about. You come into politics, if you care about justice, you better go all the way to the left and accept everything that comes with going to the left, even if you got to throw away some of your convictions. If you care about moral order, you got to go to the right and accept everything that the right has to say about all these different issues. And again, that's a false dichotomy. That's a false dilemma that Christians shouldn't just give into. Now, you can choose to be a Republican or a Democrat, but you can't choose between justice and moral order. You can't choose between loving people and being truthful. The gospel doesn't allow us to make that decision. When Jesus is engaging people, he doesn't say, well, I'm going to love them and I'm going to love them in a way that's not truthful, or I'm going to be truthful with them in a way that's not compassionate. He combines those things. And so what made me realize that was Ephesians 4:15, where Paul telling the church of Ephesus, we should always be able to speak the truth in love. And if you look into what he's talking about, he's saying that the gospel is love and truth. It's not one or the other. And that if you're missing one or the other, then you're missing the gospel, right? And so that's not just something that we should apply to our personal relationships, but in that the gospel is a worldview, that Christianity is a lifestyle, we apply that even in our civic interactions. So that as I look at a policy when it comes to poverty, or I look at a policy when it comes to family, I'm looking at it from a perspective, not primarily as a Democrat. I've been a Democrat all my life, but that shouldn't be my primary frame. Not primarily as a Republican or a progressive or conservative, but primarily through this framework of compassion and conviction, social justice and moral order, and how those things come together. That's been the main the main message that the AND campaign has tried to push out there, so that Christians can apply their values in a better way. Because for so long we saw the moral majority who was all conviction but very little compassion, right? Very condemnatory when it came to people that weren't following all the rules that they felt they could follow, even though none of us follow all the rules that that we're supposed to be following, and that's what grace is for. Or you see a lot of times in the Democratic Party today, folks that say they're Christians, but their Christianity is really just a flavor or a part of the genre of progressivism. And it always conforms to what progressivism is doing, or however it's changing from day to day. Well, that's not Christianity. That's just progressivism with a Jesus piece on it, right? Like that's not what the substance of our faith. And so what we're trying to do is correct those errors by showing people how the gospel itself applies. Now, we're not trying to create a theocracy or say we're trying to force everybody to be Christian, but we are trying to help Christians view politics differently, even as they engage in a pluralistic society.
Brother, I love progressivism, the flavor. It's very, very well put, and that's what you feel. But I just think humbly, part of what I admire, and I think there's a lot of courage in the work that you're doing, is that I think about stakeholders. My brain is very framework oriented, and so I'm thinking about the Christian who's not necessarily in a leadership position. They are the congregant. They are the citizen of obviously the kingdom, but they're the citizen on earth. Then I believe I think of leaders who would like to bring their faith more to bear, right? They have their hands and they actually are genuinely just saying, I'm on a journey with God and I want to be active. But then there's another piece, which is churches and church leaders. And I think that there's been this context where brothers and sisters have seen churches either give up their power, right, in the public square, because they are in bed, so to speak, with politicians, and they're so embedded in that, and or they're completely removed from it, completely. How do you think about that? How do you think about these stakeholders when you are thinking about programming, the writing you're putting out, the form in which you want these messages to come out? How does that come into play?
Yeah, you definitely have to know who your audience is, but I think there's a general message that we say to all of them, and that is your understanding of politics has to be ordered correctly, right? So one of the things that you have to understand is that politics, as important as it is not an ultimate thing. So the folks who allow, politics to run what they say in the pulpit, the folks who get too close to a politician and are saying stuff they shouldn't say because they're trying to support this person, you've given to Caesar what belongs to God, right? The politics should never be so high up that you're willing to compromise the word or compromise your integrity for something that's political. And that goes for leaders, that goes for individuals, that goes for all the different people, within the kingdom. We have to make sure it's ordered correctly. Now, as we understand that it's not an ultimate thing, that it doesn't go above professing the gospel, right? That's our number one mission, to profess the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the Great Commission. We still have to understand that it's very important, and that it gives us that while it's not ultimate, God cares about how we interact with each other before we get to heaven, right? So it's not just us being like, hey, man, let's just wait till we get there. We have to understand that the great commandment, the second half of the great commandment is there for a reason. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the way that the AND campaign sees it is that politics gives us a robust opportunity, not the only opportunity, but a robust opportunity to love our neighbors, right? Because especially in a democracy, it puts within our sphere of influence, a way to help people out, a way to make sure that they're treated with human dignity, a way to make sure that they don't go to prison for too long if we're on a jury, a way to make sure that people are eating and kids are taken care of, or folks at the border aren't being treated inhumanely. Politics gives us that opportunity. Again, it's not the only opportunity, but I think that we're poor stewards if we have this tool in front of us that God has given us and we don't use it to do that. So whether you're a pastor, whether you're just an individual, whatever, I do think you have an obligation to engage in ways that can help people who are in your sphere of influence. Politics kind of widens our sphere of influence. And when God puts something in your sphere of influence, he expects you to do something about it. I mean, we see that in Isaiah and other places where God's coming down. It's like God is appalled that y'all aren't doing justice, that y'all are letting this iniquity go on, and you're supposed to be my people. So I think it's number one, understanding while it's not an ultimate thing, while we don't put it out of its place, it's still something that we need to engage and that we need to make sure that we're helping our neighbors through civic engagement when we have the opportunity.
I love this, man. It's the form and the at least the landscape to be able to love neighbor is unlimited, right? It's unlimited because this impacts people's day-to-day lives, right? And I think that's a beautiful place to lock arms. I want to press this question on audience even further, because I think that how do you consider your audience, particularly, let's say, for that non-Christian? Because I think for many brothers and sisters who I speak to, from a business perspective and the like, there's confusion, right? Let's say that they're just open. They're like, you know what, I'm open just to learning about God, but just I have people who say they're Christian saying that this is the way God would deal with this matter or think about this issue, right? I think over the past week, you have just, this is evergreen, but just over the past week, you've just read so many things about things happening in the public square. And then you'll have people who say, Christians saying, this is the way real Christians look at it. And then you'll have other Christians saying, this is the way, So to what degree do you kind of concede and say, you know what, the body has many parts. This is our part. Our part doesn't really touch people who don't have some sort of base? Or do you think about those people who just don't have a Christian foundation, but they're just curious? If they join the AND campaign, is there kind of like a pathway? Is there a primer around major issues where they could just start to get an understanding of like, all right, I have a foundation here. I have some theological principles. Is that part of the work, or just not? That's not where you're at today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for new believers who are trying to understand the faith, we don't reject anybody. If you're at a place where you understand it enough to kind of apply what we're saying, that's important. I think politics is probably not the place you want to start in that conversation, right? You want to read the Bible. You want to work with a pastor. We don't try to replace a pastor in any of this stuff. You need a church home. You need to be with a pastor and with a Bible study group that can walk you through the Bible so you can better understand the Bible. Our main focus, and so we don't reject those people. I think there's stuff that we have that can help those people. Our main focus is with kind of your biblical Christian, the folks who have a high view of Christology, a high view of the Bible. And we kind of start from there. So it's almost there's an understanding of the Bible. There's a true belief in the Bible. So people who don't really take the Bible series or something like that, we'll engage with them and have conversations, but our framework is going to be more so for people who are already at that level to say, okay, I believe in God. I'm here. How do I apply that belief and be faithful in the public square? And so, we can't be all things to all people. Again, I think there are people, if someone were to get our book, I think there's things that they could learn. But also there's a place for, again, your pastor and just the formation. I don't think we're about the more original level of kind of forming Christians, right? We're more saying, okay, if you're a Christian and you have these beliefs. Here's how they're applied.
Mm.
That's kind of where I fit in. Hopefully that answers
No,
what you were getting.
it definitely does, because I think that could be a stumbling block, right? Of being everywhere and nowhere, and
Yeah.
recognizing that this is important, but at what stage, right? Because sometimes I think strategically, sometimes that's a helpful on ramp, right? For example, always make the conversation that we're in a generation now where many Christians, their first touch point, or many non-Christian, their first touch point isn't Bible study, it's prayer. Right, that's been a
Mhm.
universal language, where sometimes we're so caught up in that to say, well, that's an on ramp, right? Like just that's a node, right? Of connection. I spend, I think, similarly, you and I, I read a lot of biographies, autobiographies, particularly many of them civil rights leaders and the like, and they've been so forming for me for my life. And I sometimes think about the ways in which people in the public square, people who are involved in public stewardship, leadership, civic leadership, the ways in which they have to lead in God. Obviously, it's idiosyncratic. Everyone has their own relationship with God, but there's something to be said about the patience that's required, the type of self-discipline around your words, what you could say, what you can't say, and so I'm curious for you, because you're in the thick of it. You're watching the things that are said. You have proximity to some degree to leaders. And
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about your prayer room, around, I can't say this now, but maybe I'll have to say this in 2 weeks. How do I maintain this? How am I okay with what's going on in Georgia? I live here and I'm not okay with it. And Christians are kind of like, what are we about to do? And I'm like, what can we? So how does your relationship with God, how do you lean into God differently, right? What does your structure, what does your village look like to keep you encouraged, that you don't, grow weary in doing good? Just what does that really tangibly look like for you as a father, as a husband, father, but someone doing this type of work that could drain the hell out of you, man?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the prayer life has to be taken very seriously. I think the other thing that's big for me is having a community of friends who are in similar situations,
Mm,
right? So whether it's Dr. Charlie Dace, Esau McCauley, Lisa Fields, folks like that, who I can just reach out to and say, "Hey, man, what y'all going through?" Or we see the same things and we talk through the same things. So that community, and that's biblical. That community is very important. But I'll tell you where most of my kind of inspiration and a lot of my inspiration and strength comes from. It's that civil rights generation, man.
mm,
It's at my grandfather and them's generation that was able to go through a lot and still remain hopeful. So I kind of tend to think the stuff that I go through and the stuff that I'm seeing today is nothing compared to the stuff that they had to go through. And if they could stay faithful, if they could have hope, if they could have a joy that people could see and still go through all the stuff they went through, then I can do it too. And I think
mm,
that's just proof of how God works. And so I use that. I mean, I was reading a book about Dr. Martin Luther King and all the pressure that he had coming at him from all sides and getting sued by the state and having the elders not wanting him to move forward. Other folks said he's not going fast enough. And when I read that, I'm just like, man, if he can have a positive message and constructive message and Bible filled, spirit filled message with all that was going on, then we can do it too.
mm.
And I think that's so important in this day and age. It's so easy to become cynical. It's almost in style. It's the fad is to be cynical and to talk about negative things and to be, sometimes even overly dramatic about what you're going through. That just wasn't what they did, and they didn't have the privilege of being, of doing that at that time. And I think we could learn something from that. That we should. I love the conversations that we're having about trauma and people being willing to speak on that. Please, by all means, speak out on that and seek help if that's what you need. But we don't want to move away from the resiliency either. We don't want to move away from having thick skin and understanding it's never going to be perfect. Everybody's not necessarily going to like you, celebrate you, or think you're beautiful. But there's work to be done, and we have to get it done.
Brother, that it's so well put, and I think sometimes back in the day I used to get so frustrated, we see those things like I'm not, I ain't my ancestors, those shirts I wanted them to burn on the stake, like I'm not my, I'm just like you ain't,
Right, that's not a good thing.
I'm
Yeah.
like that you are correct. There's another piece, man, because while I have you, and I know we're on the tail end of this. There's just so much wisdom that's come out of the AND campaign, and man, I continue to. I want to give flowers, obviously, glory to God, but I want to thank you. I think in the first time for a time such as this, that this has been picking up more steam. Obviously, you're not Johnny come lately. Y'all been here for a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's this other unique thing I think that's unique to the Black community, right? Which is the gender dynamics, right, have needed redemption, obviously, for some time, right? And things have not been perfect between brothers and sisters. And one of the things I think that grieves me has been because of what's happened systematically in this country, systematically targeting the homes, the policies that took Black men out of the homes and inner cities and the like. Essentially, sisters have had to carry so much. They've had to
Yeah.
carry so much economically. And then obviously when it comes to civic engagement, especially in the more latter 5 to 10 years, you see sisters on the front line, and it's kind of like the future is female, we got it, we'll do it, type of dynamic. And in some sense, you celebrate the beauty of, God, those God has gifted in our community to continue to carry the mantle and do work they've always been doing. But then there's another challenge, which is almost just like, but this wasn't God's highest design, that y'all were going to be out here by yourselves, and that there weren't brothers going to be inactive. How do you navigate that discussion and conversation, particularly as a man, where I think in a very cynical, very, very kind of, we're traumatized people, right? Where sometimes male leadership in politics is almost like this suspicion, cynicism, like, no, let the woman lead. And so how do you navigate that as an campaign? How do you theologically just stay washed with the gospel, and how you approach that while also taking your convictions and making sure that they're coming to bear?
Yeah, the first thing I try to do is just affirm the sisters around me and their hard work. I mean, and that's one place I think the civil rights movement could have done better. The only thing that changed here is that women are now getting the recognition, and that they're now represented in leadership, which is great. But they've been leading, they've been doing the work. Any campaign manager will tell you that if you got a campaign and there's no women in it, you're gonna have a lot of trouble. It's right, because the way they work is different. You don't have some of the ego that you run into with a lot of times with men when you give them something simpler to do, and now it's this big, it becomes this big issue that it had nothing to do with. So I want to affirm them, and just like the AND campaign does with its whole life project, which is our project that talks about the sanctity of life. It's all sisters, and we just really, all I try to do is lend them our platform to speak what they want to say and do what they want to do, and they're doing an awesome job of it. So giving folks opportunities to express themselves. A lot of women haven't had the chance to be in a platform and speak and do all these other things. So the AND campaign has committed to saying, no, we want to give you these opportunities. And that's the biggest thing I think that we can do, is provide those opportunities, provide resources when we can to sisters so that they can get the word out there. But they should never be alone. And I think we do have to be weary. C.S. Lewis says that the enemy sends errors in pairs. And he'll use your dislike of one era to send you into another era. So we know there's an era with how women were treated. I hope that we correct that era and not go into the opposite era by doing the opposite thing and kind of trying to leave, not working together and seeing this adversarial relationship. I think the correction would be making sure that women are seen, making sure they're heard, that they're in positions of authority when they should be in those. But at the same time, realizing that we need to work together, and that there is going to be male leadership too, but it has to be better leadership.
Amen and amen, good brother. Amen, amen, amen to that. Brother, when do you feel most connected to God, man? What is your vibe? Is this Saturday? You kind of got time to yourself? What does that look like tangibly for you, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. My sons are prayer warriors, man. And I think some of my favorite time is talking to God with them, reading the Bible with them, praying with them. And just seeing that, seeing them trust God and learn about God and learn scripture. That's probably, for me, that's probably the number one thing, man. I'm a preacher at heart, so I love to, write sermons, deliver sermons, things of that nature. That's I just find I just feel good in those spaces at those times. But especially when I'm with my family, and we're praying together, we're talking about God together, we're thinking through theological issues, no matter how small they may be, together. That's just a good space for me.
And how do you not overwork, my brother? How do you maintain? Obviously, we're on a journey, and work is fallen, and we're on our journey with God. But how do you maintain the proper order of not overworking in a time when your phone, your email, and that? How do you maintain those boundaries and almost put that level of accountability to make sure that you're balanced?
Yeah. Well, Lawrence, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm still figuring that out to some extent. So I don't have that perfectly, but my wife is helping me with that. I mean, I just try to, one of the things that Bishop Claude Alexander, who's a mentor of mine, told me is like, look, you need to lay out the things that have to be done for church, for family, and all that stuff, and then do your work and other stuff around that. So I have been able to kind of say, hey, I'm going to go pick my boys up from school. I'm going to spend the next 2 hours with them, make sure we do that. I'm going to make sure that I'm teaching Bible study at church, and then schedule the other things that I do around that. There's been times, I'll be honest with you, I'm starting to, with a younger organization, that it can get overwhelming, and I do have to do a better job. So I can't come on here and say I had it all together and have advice for everybody to give. But I do think it's about trying, man. I think it's an understanding of Sabbath and the importance of rest, and that God wants you to rest. If you're really going to do his work, you need to be rested to do the work well. And you can easily be drawn into some bad habits and some bad situations if you don't take that time.
Ooh. Brother, man, I appreciate the humility in it. But you're speaking to all of us, brothers and sisters, especially in this time. Lastly, I have to ask you this question, man, because, man, as I said, I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the ways in which you have affirmed our sisters and have just the initiatives have been, like I said, for me, it's encouraging to see the initiatives that are out, and just how you're speaking into the fray of the times. But for me, I have this. I think the political spectrum, to your point, there's such opportunity. And I often would say that there's so much untapped talent, God, divine talent, who is still wrestling with their place in this whole thing. And I think a lot of it is still economic for many people, right? When they look at King, when they look at Eggs, right? To some degree, we thank God for Coretta and her being able to carry the work forward. But these people, in many cases, they see people who die poor. And they look at the sacrifice of their parents, many of them first generation or second generation, maybe educated, and they're just like, I can't afford to do this. It feels irresponsible for me as a steward of my home. How would you speak into that from a theological lens and just from your thing? Because obviously every situation is different. It's a long tail. But I sense that, brother, in our community. I sense that tension, that there are people who with their hand to the plow to want to, but they just feel like they can't.
I think that's a legit concern. I really do. You have a family that could lose their house and all these other things that they were going through, and that was a lot of those families went through that, and it's really sad to see that. So it's something to take into consideration, and I think we just have to sit down and understand that we have to prioritize, and that we may have to be somewhat creative when we think about how to finance certain things, and it may not always be the most comfortable situation at all times, but you just got to try to plan it out to do what God is calling you to do. I believe that in many instances, there are ways to follow ministry and do it in a way that you're not going to be, walking around on the street, right? But it does take time. It takes different, connecting with different people. I don't know if there's some bright line solution for every situation, but I do think we have to realize if God is calling you to do this, that's something that needs to be done, that God makes a way, and that you may have to really focus in on doing it a little bit differently than you see folks who aren't in the body do it. But if you believe God makes a way, if you're really, and I guess I'm proof of that, if you're really determined to make it happen and to follow what God is asking you to do, he's going to make a way, and it may just take you a little bit of time to figure out what that looks like, but it'll happen if you're prayerful and you move forward in a way that is just trusting God, man. money isn't everything, but that's not an answer when somebody doesn't want to be in a situation. I mean, I've been in situations that I never want to go back to again. So I don't take that lightly.
Mm.
But we gotta we gotta kind of re-examine what comforts we have to have, what things we might not have to have, and kind of move along with that understanding. Because again, when God calls you to do something, I wouldn't recommend not doing it.
Brother, that was the way you put that is it had the reverence and the wisdom for God, and all in one. The same God, Son, stand still. I think will propel us, and He will provide the provision for the purpose. My brother, I thank you, man. I thank God for you. I have such a deep respect for the work that God has placed on your heart, for how you're stewarding it forward at this time in history. I think it is essential, and I'm thankful, brother. How could brothers and sisters follow you, support you? What do you have coming ahead that people could champion and get behind in the near future?
Yeah, for sure. So if you want to kind of check out what some of the work that the AN campaign does, you can check us out on Twitter and Instagram at the handles at AND campaign, at AND campaign. You can follow me at Justin E. Giboney on Twitter and Instagram. You can also listen to, you see behind me is the Church Politics Podcast, where we're talking about politics from a biblical worldview, real political commentary, but from a different frame. We also have a book that's out called Compassion and Conviction. It's the AND Campaign's Guide to Faithful Civic Engagement. So we're always putting out content, always trying to reach people to make them view politics just a little bit differently. And one of the ways that you can get involved is we have the Prayer and Action Justice Initiative, where we're going to be bringing Christians from all biblical demographics together to address criminal justice issues and other issues. And so there's a lot of different ways to get involved. We may have a chapter in your city, so there's chapters, and you can email us at engage@andcampaign.org if you want to get involved with one of our chapters.
My brother, for those listening, for those watching, this is the real deal, and I pray that you do get involved and explore and learn a bit more. Particularly if you have that desire to be civically engaged and want to be faithful in your witness in doing so. And so, my brother, man, all respect to you, man. You got a fellow soldier in this thing, and I look forward to many more conversations that we will have, man. Good brother, salute.
God bless you, man. Thanks for having me, Lawrence.
God bless you.